Well, welcome students. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's lecture. This week's lecture is going to cover ageism and particularly serving older adults. This topic is going to be particularly useful, especially given the times that we're in right now, as we're seeing with the COVID-19 virus that has been spreading. We're seeing a curve in individuals over the age of 65, in addition to individuals with pre-existing health conditions being impacted more severely by the COVID-19 virus. And so as we move through this lesson today, what we're going to talk about is the notion of ageism as we move into the stages of late adulthood for our class. Okay, first off, I thought it would be helpful to go ahead and start by defining ageism in particular. So ageism, the term, is described as a prejudice or discrimination against a person's age. And what we've seen in our culture is typically discrimination on behalf of younger individuals who are targeting elderly individuals. Ageist feelings typically form during the adolescent years of our lifespan development, the same time actually that racism, ethnocentrism, and other biases come to fruition. So one of the things that's important to understand is ageism in itself is also a social construct, and it takes different forms based on different societies and where we live, okay? Now, another thing to keep in mind is within the United States, we've seen a boom in two populations. One of aging individuals who fall under the baby boomer generation, and a second increase in millennials, okay? And so what we've seen is there's actually been a shift in our society where ageism now, as it applies to our culture, not only includes the elderly, but what we're also seeing is discriminatory acts against younger individuals, particularly millennials, okay, that has been unfair and rooted in prejudice. To highlight this, I wanted to give you some funny examples of 3 videos here located on YouTube, okay, that talk about stereotypes related to both older individuals, as seen here in The Office. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that show. I enjoy that show too, so there's an example there, as well as 2 examples for millennials of a millennial interview and millennial support. So what I'm going to actually do is ask you now to go onto Blackboard. Under Blackboard, what you'll see are directions, a link for videos for Blackboard for today's lecture. And what I'm going to ask you to do is go ahead and watch those videos posted on Blackboard. You can put me on pause in a second here, and then return to this slide after you've watched the videos, and we'll unpack the videos a little bit more. Okay, so go ahead, click on to pause for me, and go to Blackboard to watch those videos, and then come back. Okay, if you've returned from watching those 3 videos, then one of the things that I wanted to highlight, I hope first that you found them entertaining, but the second thing I wanted to point out is these are the current stereotypes that exist facing both elderly individuals and millennials in our society. And so if you look at some of these stereotypes that exist, what you saw was a common portrayal of elderly individuals who may be disconnected, as some people believe, with society, who tend to have poor memories, who tend to prattle on about issues that are unrelated to the topic or carry little value or import of support or input, okay, particularly within the business realm. If you notice, they portrayed millennials as individuals who didn't have a grasp of reality, who weren't composed of a strong work ethic, who didn't have an idea of what it meant to engage in the business world. And so these are inaccurate stereotypes that are being perpetuated about millennials, many of which you all, okay, enter into that category. And so one thing to consider is when you step out into the job force, one of the things that you want to understand is some of these stereotypes do exist. And even though it is in fact illegal to discriminate towards individuals based on their age, okay, because it is considered a federally protected class, you can see how some of these stereotypes perpetuate. One thing to keep in mind, the millennial support video in particular, I first saw this video, I first saw this video posted in an executive leadership retreat amongst some CEOs and CFOs amongst larger organizations. And so this is a stereotype that exists in our society, which we're going to want to address. The other reason why I wanted you to be aware of these stereotypes as they relate to ageism is because when you're stepping into your careers in the healthcare industry and you're applying for jobs, you will want to be aware of how people might perceive you in a job interview. A lot of you have known me and you have never seen me without a beard. And that's actually a particular reason why I choose to grow a beard, is because if I shave, I literally look like I'm 12 years old. And so I'm aware that in many contexts and in meetings, particularly earlier in my career, I looked like the youngest person in the room. And when that occurred, I found that people didn't listen to me or take me as seriously as maybe I had hoped. And so this is one of the ways, and me being aware of that, that I've kind of changed my appearance a little bit in order to actually look a little bit older, in order to be taken seriously in certain settings, okay? So now that we're aware of some of the stereotypes that exist facing both millennials and baby boomers within our society, then another important thing to keep in mind is anytime that there are acts of discrimination or prejudice going on within our society, those become what we call social justice issues. And so, in the nursing field, if you're interested in entering into the field of nursing, one thing to keep in mind in particular is that both within the medical profession as well as in social work, issues are going to arise that become what we refer to as social justice issues because they lead to other problems within our society. And so, a lot of times within our culture, other social justice issues such as gender rights, racism, and other socially constructed ideas of inferiority tend to take headlines or be more dominantly discussed within social settings. But it's also important to understand, especially given the large spread of millennials and baby boomers within our society, that ageism in particular is also important. So ageism may not receive the same amount of attention as other forms of discrimination in the world today, but it's something that's growing as a public problem. And as we're seeing more baby boomers within our society retiring, and as we see more individuals who are younger entering the workforce, then what we're starting to see is this sort of social push-pull effect of where jobs are being created and for whom based on how old they are. So the term ageism itself was actually coined in 1968 by Robert Butler, okay? Ageism in particular has been called the ultimate prejudice or the last discrimination, the cruelest rejection. I don't know if you all remember, but one of my previous classes, one of the things that I emphasized is ageism in particular is a serious issue because it's something that we're all bound to face at some point. If we're blessed to live a long life and enter into the age of baby boomers down the road and into late adulthood, then something to consider is that how we treat individuals in our society who are aging is how we will be treated later on in life. And so one thing to consider is as children are being raised, okay, particularly sensitive to this notion of ageism because they're being told either you're too young, children don't need to have a political opinion, or they speak when spoken to, and some of those traditional phrases that children have heard growing up. But they've also seen that when you're old, if you're not taken seriously, if you're sort of sent away, if you're not cared for or regarded as someone that still holds value, then there can also be a fear that develops in children of growing older. And so one important thing to understand is that ageism affects all of us, whether it's current in our current culture because we fall into a baby boomer category, or whether or not we're younger than baby boomers and treating individuals differently because that is how we'll later be treated because later generations that follow us will treat us the same way. Okay, and just to drive home a few more thoughts related to ageism and how it impacts us in our society, though ageism does not receive the same amount of attention as other forms of discrimination, the societal impact is significant, particularly because we are now discriminating against two groups instead of one, elderly individuals as well as millennials. Now, our current hegemonic practices or hegemony in particular is a term meaning those systems that are in power, okay, or control the power in our society. So hegemonic practices, surrounding ageism doesn't only impact the current population of adults, but will impact us one day as well as we move forward into our lifespans, okay? Now, one thing to keep in mind is ageism doesn't typically present as overtly discriminatory or old-fashioned in its approach. Ageism doesn't tend to shock individuals the same way that racism or sexism does, okay? And so one thing to keep in mind is ageism tends to be a joke. And just like I showed you in those videos of The Office and the millennial videos, people tend to laugh at ageist discriminatory practices rather than think of them as a serious issue. A lot of times, too, our society still sees ageism as a senior issue. A lot of folks don't realize that millennials and younger generations aren't being taken seriously either, and as a result, they're treated differently. Now, particularly within the US, because we are a capitalist society, because we do drive from a business mindset in terms of our economy, what we also see is that societies tend to view the youngest and the oldest workers as the least contributing members to a business. And so what we're seeing now is that if you fall somewhere in the middle, you tend to be able to thrive in your career. But if you're just entering into the field, as the videos have suggested in terms of stereotypes, you can be stereotyped and taken less seriously. And if you're older, falling into the baby boomer category, some people believe that you have nothing further to contribute to the workforce. And so this type of mentality here can have severe consequences for us as a nation, as well as the global economy moving forward, especially when we consider that you all are going to be the second largest workforce entering in to our society as baby boomers begin to retire. So now what I'd like to do is go ahead and offer, just as I promised before, some statistics and a basic breakdown, the reality of how a concept such as ageism actually is seen statistically and implemented within our society. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you two bases for comparison. I'm going to give you some statistics related to the United States and how ageism is manifested within our culture. And on the next slide, what I'm going to do is compare some of those same statistics or similar statistics of ageism as it relates to Europe. The reason I'd like to do this is because, as I stated before, ageism is a socially constructed notion. And so individuals can be discriminated against, but it can look different in each culture that we're in. So one thing to keep in mind is AARP, which is the American Association of Retired Persons, okay, conducted a survey. And what they found was that 64% of workers say that they have either seen or personally experienced ageism in the workplace. This is a big deal considering 64% of individuals are saying, hey, this does in fact exist. 58% of workers today believe that ageism begins when we reach the age of 50. Now, I know to you, if you're at a younger place in the lifespan development, particularly if you're a millennial, 50 can seem kind of old when you look at a 50-year-old. But if you're in the middle of your lifespan development or early into ending your years in early adulthood and moving into middle adulthood like me, then 50 doesn't seem that old at all. In fact, it seems kind of young. And so it's important to understand that where you are in your lifespan, 50 is an interesting gauge to measure because if you're being discriminated against at the age of 50, that can feel pretty downtrodden at times. Another interesting statistic is 92% of workers who have seen age discrimination happen in the workplace or have experienced it firsthand say it's either very or somewhat common to see. Okay, so they're saying this is a common practice within our society. Now, one thing I'd like to talk about is we've been addressing older individuals here. Okay. But I'd like to draw our attention on a couple of other key statistics related to both baby boomers and millennials. 15% of workers in a recent survey said that it would be unacceptable to have a boss who was 70 years old. Remember when we talked about the notion of stereotypes that individuals seen as older in our society hold less value. And so most individuals here, this 15%, are believing that 70 is too old to have as a boss. That's 3 times greater than those who found it unacceptable, all right, to have a boss that was 30 years old, okay, or a 30-year-old boss. So Individuals who are under 25 in the workforce are at least 2 times as likely to have experienced ageism than other groups. So this goes back to that millennial notion where individuals who are younger are also being treated differently. And 48% of accountants surveyed believe that it's more difficult to get a job after the age of 40. Interesting here because it's impacting one particular area of our economy, right? And what I thought was also interesting to understand here is that, remember when I said that we're seeing a shift in the workforce, who we're creating jobs for and who we're choosing to let go is changing as more millennials enter the workforce. Cisco in particular said that it would be hiring 2,000 millennials, but at the same time, what they're doing is laying off 12,000 other, presumably older, mid-tier workers. And so what we're seeing here is a transformation in the value of what an individual brings to a workplace based on their age. And finally, 64% of older adults say that they have seen or experienced ageism in the workplace. So as we're saying before, this is something that is predominantly existing within our culture, and it's touching on 2 age groups, not only one. Okay, what I'd like to do here is go ahead and offer some statistics related to ageism as it relates to European culture. Particularly within Europe, 35% of Americans say they have experienced unfair treatment directed towards them solely because of their age. This is higher than what we see related to genderism, okay, or sexism, and ethnicity in Europe. So ageism is actually higher than these other categories of discrimination in Europe. A couple of other facts that I thought that you might find interesting is 44% of Europeans see ageism as a serious problem. The country most concerned about ageism is actually France, where 68% of the population sees ageism as an issue. Isn't that fascinating? You know, here in the United States, we would say that racism and sexism is primarily the issues that we face here as a country. But in Europe, particularly in France, they're saying it's actually ageism, okay? The percentage of Europeans who were insulted, abused, or even denied services because of their age, 29%. Okay, and look at this. Some people in certain European areas don't even believe that ageism is a real issue. More than 30% of people in Turkey believe that ageism in their country doesn't exist at all. Okay, so it seems to sort of ping pong back and forth depending on where you are. Okay, and then here, fewer than 1 in 2 people in the 55 to 64 age demographic are employed. Okay, so that's a small notion of people that are being employed in Europe, and only 1 in 10 people who are 65 to 69 are gainfully employed in Europe. So you see how here individuals who are aging, and if they don't have anyone to care for them from a younger generation, are finding themselves in a very scary place, because as a result of that, they can't survive on the employment that they have if they can find a job at all, okay? And in particular here, people aged over 70 have the lowest perceived status in European society, even within their own eyes. And so that's a sad statistic to consider when an individual in a culture believes that they hold little value based on how old they are. The social worker term or sociological term for when a person believes that they are of less value, okay, because of what society tells them, or is referred to as internalized oppression. And so if an individual is told, for example, in US society, that they are worth less as a human being based on, let's say, their race, then what happens is that individual believes growing up that they don't deserve some of the same privileges in society as a result of that. And so what we're seeing in Europe here, internalized oppression actually is onset around the age of 70, because people are told that they hold less value once they reach that age in European society. Now, the reason why I wanted to highlight these statistics, both for the United States and Europe, is because I want you to keep this in mind as you move through your second aging adult interview. What I think is really important to understand is as you're hearing from aging adults, okay, then another important thing to understand is how we value individuals within our society and how those individuals also value themselves. And so a lot of you have spoken to aging adults in your first interview, who talked about the notion that they're still sharp intellectually, they still have passions and interests, and many of them are just looking for someone to connect with and be able to talk to. And so, as a result of that, it's important to understand how society views individuals who are up there in years and falling into their aging adult category. Okay, finally, for the end of today's lecture, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for being patient and flexible as we continue on with the term. One of the things that I want to do is just highlight, make sure to check Blackboard for your homework, okay? You don't want to be this guy here and not have your homework done. So please be sure to check Blackboard for your homework assignments, for your reading, anything else that's due for that for a particular day or this week. If you have any questions, you are more than welcome to email me. I also want to point out too, if you need to touch base with me for any reason, if you would like to be able to connect with me by phone, by video, I'm happy to reach out and set up a WebEx appointment for you. All you need to do is email me and we'll set up a time. You're more than welcome to do that. I'm happy to connect with any of you. If you have questions via email, that's fine too. I will be checking my email and I will get back to you quickly. So I just want to say you all are in my thoughts and prayers. Continue to let me know what else I can do for you. I want you to be successful, okay? As we close out today's lecture, I just want to draw in, we're still going to continue with the centering exercise. I still want to draw in on the fact that even though we've switched to a remote platform for learning, we can still center, we can still be aware of God's presence in our lives every single day, right? And so one of the things that I want to do is focus on today's centering verse, which comes to us from Revelations, okay? Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, then I will enter his house and dine with him, and he with me. Okay. And under this notion, this theme, okay, of accepting one another, what I'd like to do is use acceptance as our centering word for today. Okay. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like you to focus in for a minute on the fact that acceptance can mean different things to us in our lives. I'd like us to be able to remember that God is present with us through every single moment of every day. And right now, we're constantly receiving information. I know that it seems a little scary and overwhelming, but I also want to let you know that I take complete faith and comfort in knowing that as this information is coming up, we are neither abandoned nor neglected by God. And he's with us in every single moment as we're going through this. And so for me, the word acceptance means is that there are some times where I'm going to receive information that I may not be like hearing, I'm worried about or I'm nervous about. But I know that I can accept that information and knowing that God's present with me, I'm not alone through this, okay? And so what I'd like for you to do is go ahead and keep your hands and feet in a nice comfortable position. I'd like you to try to block out all of those worries and concerns, right? For literally 2 minutes, we can forget about everything that's going on. We don't have to worry. We don't have to be concerned because God's present with us in these 2 minutes. And so think about what this notion of acceptance means for you and your life as you draw in on God's presence at this moment. What I'm going to do is I'm going to allow us to go ahead and center. I will keep a pause for the next 2 minutes, and then I'll speak again and close us out for today's lesson. Okay, so take a nice deep breath, close your eyes, and I'll visit us back in a minute and a half. Okay, go ahead and take a nice deep breath. Open your eyes. I want to thank you so much for participating in the lecture today. Please also don't forget to jump on the Blackboard and take your assessment quiz. All you need is that score so that I can give you credit for attendance today. Thank you so much, all right? And we'll come back to our next lecture for Wednesday. I appreciate you all. If you need anything, please reach out. I'm available to you, all right? Take care. Thank you.